Do you ever feel like you lose anything in graphic novels? Because there's another class I took where we read a Dracula in graphic novel form, but I've read the original text, and it wasn't just me. There was other students agreed that we really didn't like the graphic novel version because there was a lot that was missing. I feel like Dracula was a hard text to do because it's not very dialogue oriented. It's very much narrative,
Right.
and it's hard to transfer over into the graphic novel. Do you think graphic novels ever lose anything like that? Because there were certain aspects that the Dracula version definitely lost, like just like characterization and stuff.
Well, you think you just answered your own question there. I mean, it depends on the reader, and it depends on how invested you are in the words of a particular book. Like, I think Fahrenheit 451 does an amazing job of translating, and even Ray Bradbury does the preface to that book saying this is a legit version of my book, you know. But yeah, like there are some books that I've read where the language is just absolutely beautiful, the narration is beautiful, and you would lose something if that was translated into a graphic novel. A Kite Runner is probably a good example of that, where that book was like a beautifully written book. I love that book. They made a graphic novel version of it, and it's just not. It doesn't have the same weight. But for somebody who would not have read Kite Runner, the book, and they got to experience part of that story through the graphic novel, you know, it's opening up, I would say, a different readership to some books, like the Dracula. You know, a lot of people who may have read the graphic novel and would have appreciated that may never have read the prose book. And for the people who would have read the prose book and appreciated that more, well, that's there for them. It just opens avenues and options to different types of readerships, I think.
Yeah. Do you encourage students to read the full version after they've read the graphic novel version?
Well, we don't do a lot of, like I said, there's a couple, like Hamlet and Fahrenheit 451, and then, you know, what other ones do we have that have like a graphic novel adaptation? We have The Alchemist, which is an awesome book that we have a graphic novel of. But most of the graphic novels we read are just that. They're just graphic novels without a prose equivalent, you know. But yeah, I tried it once. With my class that after we read Fahrenheit 451, the graphic novel, we tried to go back and read the regular book. Kids were not having it. They're like, we already read this. We're done. We want to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's I think you do lose some stuff when you're doing a graphic novel. You have to. It's a different medium. All mediums lose something in the transition from one to another. You also gain things from the graphic novel that aren't present in the original text. So I think there's a trade-off. I also think it's like what the focus is. Most of our students aren't going to be English majors. And I think the focus is the story and the themes that are brought up in those works. And it's our job to help them understand those themes and to discuss them in interesting and analytical ways. I think the more that we can do that, the better. So, yes, is there something lost by reading the graphic novel version of Dracula? And I think it's up to you as an educator to decide if that loss, what's being lost and what's being gained, is far outweighed on the loss side. Then you probably may want to use that graphic novel. Maybe it's not a good graphic novel to use for that.
For me, it was mostly the feminist issues were just completely gone from the graphic novel version.
But that sounds like an awesome essay then. That sounds like you assigned the graphic novel and the original text and asked the kids to look at the feminist perspectives and what's lost, and you know what I mean? Then that sounds like there's also examples where you can give those two versions of the text and have like very unique essay prompts that talk about comparing and contrasting the graphic novels. There's a ton of compare and contrast possibilities when you have a graphic novel version of an original text.
Yeah, especially if that's the reason you're like tackling the text, right? Like you're tackling Dracula to talk about sort of like gender roles and taking the literary criticism from a feminist point of view at that point. Then you probably want to abandon the graphic novel, especially if you think that it removes those vital components. Because you're going to lose things in the transition. Like if you're adapting a Cormac McCarthy novel into a graphic novel, you're going to lose some of that beautiful prose that he has in there. That's just going to be gone. But you may gain a better understanding with the visuals of sort of these worlds that he's creating, these sort of dark and dreary and often hopeless worlds. A student might pick that up more, again, because they're not all like, you as an English major are going to read that and be like, oh my god, this is beautiful and incredible. You as a high school student might be like, when's this ending, right? Like, why is this so long? But now if you read the graphic novel version, again, this is not all the time, right? Like, I'm not an advocate. He's teaching the graphic novel course. So like, they're doing all graphic novels. I'm not an advocate for saying, let's teach all graphic novels in the English classroom. I'm saying we should mix it up. So when we're reading short stories, we're reading graphic novels, I am an advocate of excerpts for novels, but that's a whole different conversation. But I'm just saying it should be all mixed up. And then you choose the graphic novel that you think best suits your purpose for whatever you're teaching at that particular time. And then abandon other ones that may not be as good. Or may not be as good as adaptation.
I think as English teachers, too, a lot of English teachers tend to believe, well, because we love books, everybody needs to love books.
Yeah.
But, we have kids that are going into fields where they won't be reading prose, or they won't be reading fiction books ever again, and we should say, well, people should always quest to read, but maybe they should, but a lot of these students aren't going into the arts. They're not going into a profession where they want to sit down and read Jane Eyre when they get home from work after 8 hours, 10 hours, wherever they work. Yeah. And we have to understand that too. I think it's easy for us to just like science teachers, a lot of them believe that all kids should be this into science, or math teachers believe, well, why don't you appreciate geometry? It's like not everybody has the same interests, and we can't forget that.
It's incredibly important, though, while we have them to discuss those ideas, like feminism, in the classroom. Yeah. But then we just need to think about what's the best tool to teach them those themes, and maybe they're not always the 500-page novel, right? Maybe sometimes it is something else. Because like I'd want to teach like Walden, right? But if I give that to them, like, I love that book, I think those themes are incredibly important, I really want to talk about them, but if I gave them to a high school student, there's a couple that might be like, oh, cool. For the most part, they're going to be like, why? What is this? And there is a graphic novel adaptation of Walden that in a few pages really allow you to really dig into those themes, and they could just be a couple-day lesson plans. And here we talked about, this idea that's presented in this novel, but we did it in a couple days, and maybe that's all they really need to sort of just introduce them to it, because they're not going to spend this entire time talking about transcendentalism, but it introduces them to this idea, right? Yeah. And they sort of have that first interaction with it, and I think that's important too sometimes.
So you often will just take like sections of graphic novels not the whole text.
I've definitely used excerpts in the same way that I've used excerpts from political speeches, and the same way I use excerpts from, and that you have to let them know, like, all right, this is just an excerpt, right? This is not the entire work. So be conscious of the fact that perhaps if you read the entire thing, you'll have a different understanding of this. But I often try to do the best that I can to sort of lay that out prior to, and not let them, and not sort of bastardize the artist's work by only presenting a bit of it and then saying this is what they meant. But at least by saying this is the context of where this comes from. Let's sort of analyze it for what this is at this point.
So obviously, we're in a comic shop. There's tons of different types of comics out there. Would you put, like, superhero comics on the same level of stuff, like the Beowulf version, or like or Mouse, or things like that? Do you put them on the same level?
Some. I mean, you have the ongoing series, some of them that are just like, they're just there to make money, and they're just okay stories, and people get pissed at them because they're just generic. But then you have some stories like like the Vision story that was out last year. There's these two trades about like Vision creates a family, and he lives in the suburbs of Washington D.C. because he's like the Avengers like guy in D.C. and he communicates with like Congress and stuff like that, and his family, who is half alien robot, trying to live a normal life, and it's all about suburbia and what our role is as citizens. Like, that book it's really good, and you get into that, and it brings up a ton of issues and commentary on society. Like, that book is fantastic, and like Superman American Alien is a ridiculously cool book to teach because it does so many different things with art and story that. Yeah, I would say that I would put those on the same level as some of those other books for sure. I teach the Hawkeye book, the Marvel one that came out recently. I think that book is incredibly unique in the way that my kids don't really care for that one, but I feel like there's a lot to be taught in that book. So yeah, I mean, do we do some like popcorn, if you will, like beach, like beach reads as well? Sure we do, because those are also fun. But no, I think there are some superhero books out there that people don't really know about. Like, I don't know, whoever I've given that Superman American Alien book to has loved it. Comic book fans or non-comic book fans, they've loved it. And the same thing with that Vision book. That Vision book is so deep that they don't know it exists, unless you're a comics fan, unless you're hang out in a comic book store and have friends that read comics, you might not know about that.
Because I honestly don't know a whole lot about, like, superhero comics and stuff like that, other than what I've read in the classroom. The only comic book series I've ever read was the Logan series, the Origins one, the one that the bad movie was based off of.
Well, you're
but
talking to
the original text was good. It was really interesting, but that was the only one I've ever read, so I really don't know a whole lot about.
Well, that's one of the things too. It's like, I have friends like Adan and Ronell and my friend Tim and Adam, and we share ideas. We share, like, what should I be reading? And then they'll tell me, have you started reading this? No. Read it. And then I'll go pick it up and I'll read it. So you have to kind of create a little bit of a culture and like a community that can help you find those titles. Like, if you messaged me and was like, hey, what were a couple of those titles, or give me a couple I should be reading, I'd be more than happy to share a couple with you. And then you'd read those, and then you'd probably be looking for more, or you'd share those with people that you knew, so it becomes this community of people sharing ideas of amazing stories that, they don't really know.
Superhero like works or graphic novels also bring like a different sort of vibe into the assignment, because often students come with their prior knowledge about that, which is a different read than reading something they know nothing about.
Yeah.
Right. So they have background information. They feel more like an authority on that particular hero because they know about them. They've seen the films. They may have read some of their comics. So it creates a different interaction with the text than other texts do, which is really cool. I also think, like, as far as putting them on the same level, there are a ton that definitely deserve to be on the same level. The two that Eric mentioned, The Vision and
American Alien.
Yeah, American Alien, probably do better at dissecting social isolation than any other graphic novel I can think of. And then it has the added benefit of them being familiar with those characters, right? Like, familiarity creates a sort of ease that allows you to analyze, that allows you to interact with text a lot better than perhaps something that you're going into cold.
People know who Superman.
People know who Superman is, and they feel a lot more comfortable. It's like I had when we did. I bring up this example a lot. I think it was really interesting that I read this Spider-Man comic a few times, at least like 3 or 4 times through, and never even thought about once. And this is actually when I was student teaching for Eric. And it was about Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man, who's mixed race, black and Hispanic, and he gets bit by a radioactive spider also. So the spider has a little number on it, and one of the students is reading this, and because he knows Spider-Man, he just feels comfortable. He's like taking a look at all different things. He's not so focused strictly on the story and like what's happening, because he sort of understands what's happening already. He has a prior knowledge coming into it, and he sees, and he's just like, oh, like he's bitten by number 42 for a reason, right? Like, number 42 is Jackie Robinson's number, who broke the color barrier in baseball, and this is a Spider-Man, a colored Spider-Man, a Spider-Man of color, breaking the barrier in large part for superheroes, right? Like, there's never been a Spider-Man of color up to that point. There have never been any real major comic book character that had been a person of color up to that point. There have been superheroes of color, but they weren't one of the big. It wasn't Captain America, because Sam Wilson came after that. It wasn't Wonder Woman, it wasn't Superman, it wasn't Batman. But here's Spider-Man, and now it's a Spider-Man who's a person of color. And he sort of made that connection just based off what he knew about the character, sort of the comfortability that he had coming into reading that text, and was able to make a lot of interesting connections that you don't see with other texts. So I think, again, just with every text, you choose wisely which superhero text you're bringing in, but I think there's definitely a place for it, and they're definitely doing a lot of cool things with them.
Okay, another thing, this is just about curriculum. Like, maybe you could talk about what it is more specifically, what you actually do with graphic novels. You talked about it a little bit. There was an assignment we had to do for one of my classrooms. It was an option on the final, where we can take one of the works that we read and turn it into a graphic novel if we want to do. This was my very poor drawing version of
really
one of the stories. But do you ever do anything like that in your classroom?
Yeah, I have my graphic novel course, actually. I don't have it's not an art class, though, right? And I like to say this to teachers who are afraid to make kids, because some kids don't like to draw. A lot of kids don't like to draw. And even if it's like stick figures, they're like, I can't draw. And I know the reaction to that is, yes, you can. It's like, if a kid don't want to draw, don't make them draw. But they script it out. So I showed them like different versions of what a comic script looks like from a writer that would give it to an artist, you know what I mean? Because I'm working on a graphic novel myself, so I've done versions of that. So when I have the kids create comics, they script it. So they do a full script, like how does the panel layout go? What's in the panel? Is there any dialogue? What's the dialogue? What information does the artist need to know? Like, what do the backgrounds look like? What are the characters wearing? So it's a unique kind of writing that they've never done before, and there's no set industry standard for comic book scripts, not like film and TV where there's a set industry standard. So you can kind of do it however you need to do it so your artist understands what you want. So that's what I do. I do it a lot. In my graphic novel class. Like most of my CUAs, my common unit assessments, my big 3 grades, are actually them creating comics. The first one, they create 2 pages from a short story that exists. The second one, they create heroes and villains as a class, and then they create 3 pages of their interaction. And the third one is just them creating their own story, their own scripts. Okay. So they have a lot of experience in creating comics, but they don't draw a thing. Now, if I have a kid in my class who's an amazing artist, and they're like, "Can I draw this?" I say yes, but I tell them that they have to submit art to me in order to like draw it. And if a kid submits art that's not good, I say they can't draw it because then they're just trying to get out of writing. Yeah. You know, but if they can draw amazingly, I let them run with it.
So you do both, where it's like they're taking original works and turning it into a graphic novel, and then they're doing their own, creating their own.
Yeah, we built to that.
Do you ever do stuff like that?
We do that often when we do the we're sort of introducing the multimedia literacy, which pretty much takes up a whole semester at some point, to get them to understand. We were just talking about how you may lose something, you know, switching from prose to the graphic novel format or graphic novel medium, and vice versa, how you can gain something. So we really try to illustrate that point by having them sort of take on different mediums. So we'll have them go over a certain work, and if it's in graphic novel form, we'll have them turn that into a piece of prose. How does that look if that story is now a piece of prose? How does it change? What are you able to do now that you weren't able to do in this other medium? And we'll have them do short films. We'll have them do just still images, or have them take a photo to sort of capture an idea or a theme. So they're working with all different mediums, and they're seeing how one medium does something better than the other, and the limitations of certain medias as well. So yeah, we have them turn into graphic novels, we have them take photos, we have them do short films, and then turn things into prose that weren't, just so they can see how the mediums work and what they do efficiently and what they sort of don't do as well as others.
Yeah, because what I found with this, even what I'm doing with mine is it's mostly a narrative story that I'm turning into a graphic novel, and just trying to find which lines I'm going to use and what I had to take out. And so it did make me think about that Dracula version, where it's like why they chose to take those parts out and what they decided to keep in.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And there's so many like interesting ways to look at that too. Like, what story is this person trying to tell when they take out the things that they do, right? Like, they're making conscious decision to remove certain parts, much for the most part, for space, right? Like, you can't make a true Bram Stoker Dracula film and keep everything in there. Yeah. So what's being cut out, and why did you cut that out? Same thing for a graphic novel. Why did they choose to cut out what they cut out, and how does that alter the story? Right? I think those are interesting questions and interesting sort of elements of the mediums to analyze and take a look at.
As somebody who, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit jaded by graphic novels and like concise stories. You know, I see like, I went and saw Hamilton, right? I saw Hamilton, and I was just like, this is too long. And my first reaction was, I'd cut this character out, I'd cut this out. People were like, what'd you think of it? I'm like, it was great, but it was too long. We needed butts and seats, man. You know, think about butts and seats and how this, you know, I can't believe, like, original Shakespeare watchers went and saw a 5-hour version of Hamlet. Like, holy cow. Like,
a lot of them standing.
Yeah, a lot of them standing. It was like, oh my god! Like,
in the pit, you only could stand.
Get rid of Fortinbras. Like, what are you doing? So, you know, concise. Like, being concise and telling a good story. It's really hard to be concise and tell a great story. You know, I'm not going to say the name of a book, but I got a graphic novel that comes out very soon. I got like a previewed copy of it. And it's supposed to be pretty good. And it was pretty good, but I had criticisms of it, and the person who gave it to me was like, really, you didn't like it? I said, I didn't like it. It's just like the pacing of it was not what I wanted it to be, you know, and pacing a graphic novel is very hard, just like pacing a film. I think a well-paced film and a well-paced graphic novel is just really hard to do. And there's a lot to be said about editing. And I think I've been opening a lot more conversations with my students about editing, like cutting stuff out, like the films and graphic novels, like, or making it longer. Like Pride of Baghdad is a graphic novel that we teach. And I think that book should have been 2 or 3 times its length. I think so. But the art is so detailed that I can't imagine how much longer it would have taken if it was bigger in length. But I want more story in that book. I think one of the problems with that book is that there's not enough development of those characters. So we also have those discussions with kids as well. And it's like, well, just like films, graphic novel, it takes like a lot more time to put more story in. And if you don't have the budget or the time, because you're under constraints from the book company or the film company, editing is a big deal. Sorry, went a little rant there.
No, it's fine. Let's see. I had one more question. What was it? Oh, this is my last question. It was just, usually before you introduce a text to a classroom, you go over it yourself and you decide if it's going to work. Does it take about the same amount of time with a graphic novel as with before you introduce a regular novel into the classroom? What's the type of preparation that you do before you bring in a graphic novel?
Well, it's weird, right? Because graphic novels, as they have images. So you're reading a graphic novel, like you're reading like Craig Thompson's Blankets, and it's such a beautiful book. It's such an amazing book, and I'm like, oh my god, I want to teach this. I felt the same way about The Sculptor from Scott McCloud. I'm reading this graphic novel, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to teach this. And then like 3/4 of the way in, there's like a naked woman, and I'm like, and in both books, the nudity is very innocent. You know what I mean? It's very PG-13. It's very innocent. But it's still nudity, and a parent can come to the school board and say, why is your teacher giving my kids this smut? It's not smut. But a parent could argue, well, you gave them an image of a naked woman. It's like, so books like that where I feel like I wish the creators would consider teachers using their book a little bit more. And I know, and we have this fight all the time where half of our friends are like, yeah, but you can't stifle the creative forces. You can't do that. If they want to put a nude woman in there, they should be able to. And I say yes, but how hard would it be to put her in a bra in that scene? Just so more teachers could use that book and get out. So
go in and draw over it and everyone.
Yeah. But no, I think that's the biggest. Like, the story's got to be great, and all of the images have to be appropriate for me to say, this is one I want to teach. But you get through it quicker, you know what I mean, than a normal book, going just like the speed of it. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, one, I think it's a little bit different in that oftentimes, like, the graphic novels I'm using, I'm just a graphic novel fan, so, like, I read a lot of them on my own, and then once I'm reading them, I'm like, oh, hey, this would be great, on this particular theme. So it's like, I don't have to do the work because I already had done it on my own because I wanted to, and it's just something now that I'm bringing in. There are other times where, like, this past semester, like, they decided on a novel to use for the semester. And it's just like, we're using this novel. It's a novel I never heard of. It's not a classic. It's not even a lot of classics I haven't read. So, like, that's something I have to bring home and read specifically for class. Where I don't run into that problem as much unless it's somebody like Eric saying, like, hey, I just read this and I had it. And he's like, this will be awesome. I'm teaching it in my graphic novel class. Like, okay, cool. Then I take it home and I read it. And again, it's just, that's where definitely the time aspect comes in, because it's just a lot quicker to be able to move through that graphic novel, especially if you're familiar with the medium, and just move through it and be like, yes, I can do this, and this is how I could do it. Right? You might have to go back later on when you're planning your specific lesson plans and say, all right, what page is this on that I really want them to take a look at? When you're thinking about your questions, and when they're going over it, you might have to go back over it. But for the most part, it's a lot quicker to sort of take a graphic novel recommendation, plow through it, see what you like about it, see if it's good for your class, and then run with it, than it is if you're getting a 400-page novel, which is fine. You take it home, you read it for the week, but even that, you're reading it in a completely different way. And the same with the graphic novel, but like when you're reading a novel that you're about to teach that you've never read before, for me it's like you have to annotate the hell out of that thing in order to really teach it well, and that's just a lot more time consuming. And it's probably going to be a lot more time consuming in your class as well. So perhaps there's a payoff there. But I'm also just not a fan of sticking to, and this is just me, there's some people who really appreciate teaching a full graphic novel. I feel like students are ready to move on a lot quicker. So I'm more of an advocate for short stories. So for me, like when I have to annotate that graphic novel and teach them for a month to 5 weeks, it's just like, I don't really want to be doing this. But again, that's just me.
You try and encourage other teachers who don't use graphic novels in their classroom to start using them. Be like,
oh, definitely, yeah. I think it's a large part of the work.
Our spec classes have really started embracing those a lot too, to engage the kids who are reluctant readers more. You know, because there's so many things you can do with graphic novels. So that's why we got like The Alchemist. A lot of those classes use The Alchemist. There's a teacher in our building who uses the class set of Spider-Man. We have. More teachers are using the graphic novels than did in the past. I'm not really pushing it, and they just know I use them. They know there's a benefit to them. They know I see the benefit to them. So a lot of them are coming to me, you know, and it's like I have comics out all the time. I have teachers who come to my class and check, because I have a huge library in my classroom of my own books. They'll come to my classroom and check out books for their kids at home. You know, they're like, oh, my kid really, what do you know, we have a suggestion. My kid's in 8th grade. You know, she really likes comics. And I'll give her some books, and they'll come back and they'll trade with me. So I'm creating a culture of it's okay for everybody to read comics. And in effect, the spillover is some of the teachers are starting to use them as well.
Mm-hmm. So I want to thank you guys for coming out I sort of came to you. I kind of came to you, but I want to thank you for doing this interview with me, taking like almost an hour to sit here with me and talk about graphic novels after you've already spent time talking about other sort of stuff here in the comic book store. So
we'll talk
thank
about
you for coming out.
We're willing to help you with whatever you need. So if you will have any follow-up questions, or you want, you know, that's what we do. So
yeah, or when you get going, if you're looking for suggestions of different texts and stuff, different graphic novels, like titles that you're like, hey, I'm doing this theme, do you have any suggestions? We can definitely toss out a ton.
And when you're getting into like observation, like when you want to go observe, when you have to observe classes and stuff, let me know. Like you can come in and observe my class whenever you want.